Today's shiur begins 8 lines from the top, the second wide line of Daf Yud Gimel. Before we begin the actual Gemara, we glance at the side where we have our nosei, the topic heading, where we've written Kvuras Yankiv. The Gemara will discuss the burial of Yankiv Avinu, Umaisa de Esav, and the incident involving Esav meeting up with the burial party, B'Ma'oras HaMachpelah, at the entrance to the Machpelah cave, where Yankiv eventually would be buried. The story will be described in detail in the Gemara. The Gemara itself now, second wide line, Yosef Zocha, the Mishnah told us that Yosef had the privilege of overseeing, of being responsible for the burial of Yankiv Avinu. My Shna Meikora, here the Gemara wants to know about the order found within 2 psukim, where there seems to be a change in order of what is stated. So Meikora, in the early pasuk, Dichtiv, it says, Vayal Yosef likbor es aviv, Vayalu ito kol avdei paro. And then it goes on to say afterwards, it mentions Beis Yosef. That's v'hodar. V'hodar means, and then afterwards it says v'chol Beis Yosef v'echov u'Beis Aviv. So in the order presented in this pasuk, you see Yosef, the Egyptian officialdom, and then the rest of Yosef's family. We'll say the members of who were of that which was the Jewish people at the time, Joseph's family. So that's the order. And then Umay Shna Lebesof, but you see on their return from burying Yankiv Avinu in Eretz Canaan, it says Tichtiv Vayashov Yosef Mitzrayim. Yosef returned to Mitzrayim. Who v'echov v'hodar v'chol ha'olim ito likbor es aviv. Notice the order here is of Yosef is in the first position, and then in this situation where they're returning, the brothers of Yosef are mentioned, the Jewish people, the family of Yosef, and then at the end, all those that went with him initially to bury Yankiv. Why the order change? Omar Rav Yochanan, B'tchila, initially, Ad shelo ro'u b'chvoidon shel Yisrael, when the Egyptians didn't see the international honor accorded to the people of Israel, lo noagu b'hen kovod, true respect wasn't shown to them, so they were relegated to the last place position. Ulebasof, but afterwards, in other words, as you'll see, after they finished the burial, because of events that took place en route, Shero b'chvodan, where the Egyptians saw the honor accorded to the Jewish people, nohagu b'hen kovod, they bestowed upon the Jewish people, the family of Yosef, their due respect. And here the Gemara elaborates regarding the matter of the respect. Dichtiv vayavo ad goren ha'otad. In the story of the burial, it says, and they arrived at Goren ha'otad. V'chi goren yesh lo la'otad. Now the word goren is a granary, and otad are thorns and thistles. So, do thorns and thistles have a granary? What does this mean, ad goren ha'otad? Amar Rabbi Avo, Melamed, what this pasuk teaches us is, Shekifuhu ksorim la'aroinu shel Yankiv, the nations of the world of that time had surrounded the coffin containing Yankiv, kegoren zeh shemakifan lo otad, just like a granary is surrounded by a fence, and fence in the time of the Gemara was a thorn fence. So the idea of goren ha'otad is you have a central entity being surrounded by something else. Similarly, the coffin of Yankiv was surrounded by Ksorim, the crowns of the leaders of the peoples of the world of that area. As far as the numbers are concerned, we'll go on in the Gemara and we'll see. Shebo Sham b'nei Esav uvnei Yishmael uvnei Keturah, the descendants of Esav and of Yishmael and of Keturah. Keturah was one of Avram Avinu's wives. They form nation states. So they all came. Tana kulam lemilchama bo. The Tanaic source reveals that when they saw the burial party, probably from the distance, Egyptian officials, very likely in military uniform, all traversing that area, these other nation states, the Bnei Esav, Bnei Ishmael, they thought that they were being challenged in war. So, Kevon Shiro Kisro Sheyosef Tole Barone Shel Yaakov, when they saw the crown of Joseph suspended over the coffin containing Yaakov, Notlu Kulon Kisrehem, they all took their crowns, Vitolum Barono Shel Yaakov, and they joined in out of honor, and they suspended their crowns around Yaakov's coffin as well. Tana Shloshim v'Shishuk Sorim Nitlu Barono Shel Yaakov, and we're taught there were 36 crowns representing 36 nation states that were suspended surrounding the coffin of Yaakov. So you can see that made a very great impression on the Egyptian officials that had been part of that funeral cortege or that burial party, and hence, as we said earlier, the change in how to accord respect to Yaakov Avinu and his family. The Gemara continues, Vayispadu Sham Mispaid Godol V'Koved Ma'od. Pasuk reveals that there was a very large and heavy eulogy. Tana Afilu Susim Vafilu Chamorim. Now this is a Tanaic source that to me is a bit obscure, certainly on a translation level. It says even the horses and the donkeys were participatory in the eulogy. For our purposes, we're going to leave that to you, the listening public, to research what the significance of that is. The idea of even animals being participatory in the eulogy, I'm sure you can find something that's of a rather deep nature to appreciate that. Kevon shegiu l'maras machpelah. Once they arrived at the Machpelah cave, and that's where the Gemara will tell us 4 couples were buried: Adam and Chava, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka. And now we're coming to the 4th couple. That would be Leah was already buried there, and now there is the interest in burying Yaakov. Also Esav, Tomakev. Esav, of course, the twin brother of Yaakov, who you can see outlived him. He arrived there, and he delayed the funeral procedure. Omar Lohen, Esav claimed, Mamre Kiryas Ha'arba, he Chevron. The pasuk refers to this location as Kiryas Ha'arba, Kiryas, a city of the 4. The Omer Yitzchak, Kiryas Arba, the name Arba is associated with Arba Zugos Hoyu. There were 4 couples. Adam v'Chava, Avram v'Sara, Yitzchak v'Rivka, and then, this is a post facto, Yaakov v'Leah. The Rashi says something interesting regarding that cave, that burial site. We're looking at Rashi on the narrow lines, approximately the 5th narrow line. Rashi says, Omar, Esav said, Kiryas Arba, Shmo, She'eno machzekes elo daled zugos. It holds only 4 couples. So, the description of the Morsach Pela as being a place that is rather limited in how many corpses, how many deceased it can contain. So Esav is here holding up the funeral procedure, And he says, Ihu kovra l'Leah. My brother, that's Yankov, he buried his wife in this cave. That b'didei, meaning in his portion. Yankov and Esav, as we mentioned before, were brothers. As brothers, they inherited that which was the property of their father Yitzchak. So Yankov, my deceased brother, and myself have a joint holding in this cave, and there are only two spots that were there upon Yitzchak's death. Yankov took advantage of his holding in the cave to bury his wife Leah there. So there's only one more spot, as the Gemara said, Ihu kovra l'Leah b'didei. Yankov already buried Leah in his portion. V'hai de payesh, the one spot that remains, payesh means is left over, remains, Didi, who? It's mine, says Esav. Omru le, so the funeral party told Esav, Zavinta, you sold your holding. Omar lahu, Esav responds, Nehi dezvini b'chirusa. It's true, I sold my firstborn portion. A firstborn, when you have heirs, the firstborn is entitled to twice as much as any one other brother. So what Esav did is he sold away his rights as a firstborn. However, pshitusa mizavini, did he sell off all of his own? Pshito means his common status, an equal status. Did I sell that off? In other words, I didn't sell off everything. I sold off whatever extra that would have been coming to me as a bechor, as a firstborn. But after selling off that extra, I and he then are equals. And that which remains is my portion. You can't bury him there. Amru le, so the family said, you did sell off everything. Dirtiv, the pasuk says, "B'kivri asher korisi li." That's a pasuk, and for our purposes, so this pasuk is Yankov saying, I want to be buried in the grave asher korisi li. What does asher korisi li mean? The HaRav Yehonasan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok ein kira elo lashon mechira. The word korisi means purchased. Shekein b'krochei hayom, outside of Israel, amongst the places overseas, kurin lemechira kira. The original Hebrew word korisi or kira was preserved in its original meaning as a sale, as a purchase. So when Yankov Avinu said, I want to be buried in the grave that I bought, meaning I bought everything from Esav. Esav has no more rights to this location. Omar lahu, so Esav says to them, oh yeah, you're saying that I sold off everything? Then havu li igrusa, bring to me the contract, the bill of sale that indicates thusly. Omrule, they told Esav, igrusa bara de Mitzrayim hi. The contract, the bill of sale is in Egypt. We're here now in Eretz Yisrael, in Hebron, and we didn't expect to meet up with you and need to prove that Yankov bought everything from you. The contract is still in Mitzrayim. Uman Nesel, who's going to go there? So they decided, okay, if you're insisting on seeing the contract, Nesel Naftali de Kolil Kiayalta. Naftali, one of the sons of Yankov, one of the tribes as we refer to them, he was there. Let him go. He's Kolil, swift-footed. Kiayalta, like an ayola. An ayola is a type of an animal, we'll say, in the deer family, very swift type creature. Dichtiv, Naftali, ayola shlucha, hanoisin imrei shefer. That's the pasuk. Now we're going to darshan this pasuk. Amar Yavo, al tikri imrei shefer, elo imrei sefer. Instead of reading the pasuk describing Naftali as who gives forth imrei shefer, fine speech, rather he is associated with the sefer, with the scroll, with the contract in our instance. So, as This just to repeat what the scene is right now. You have a funeral procession being upheld at the entrance of the Moras HaMachpelah. Esav contesting their right to bury his brother Yankov in the remaining spot, with the claim that he is the owner of the remaining burial crypt. They, the family of Yankov, in effect the nephews of Esav, are challenging, claiming, what are you holding us up for? You sold off all of your holding, and as far as the contract is concerned, okay, we're going to get the contract. And they sent the swift-footed Naphtali on that mission to retrieve the contract. The Gemara goes on. Chushim brei dedon tamon have. Chushim is a name. It's the name of the son of Don, one of the other brothers. Tamon have. Tamon means shama. He was over there. V'kiran le'udne. He was hard of hearing. Omar luhu mai hai. He didn't hear the whole conversation. He's asking what's going on. The Omrule, they communicated to him. Koma akev hai. This one, referring to Esav, he's holding things up ad osi Naphtali me'ad Mitzrayim, until Naphtali makes the round trip and comes back from Mitzrayim with the shtar, with the document. Omar lahu. And so Chushim, who is a grandson of the deceased of Yankov, he says, "V'anta osi Naphtali me'arad Mitzrayim," and until he comes back, Yehei avi abba muta b'bizayon, is my father's grandfather supposed to be lying here in indignation, in disparagement? I am not going to tolerate it for even a moment. So what did he do? Shokal kufa. He picked up a kufa, a club, a stick, a club. Machya areshe, and he smashed Esav over the head. Machya is to hit him. Areshe on his head, on Esav's head. Well, with the power of that blow, Nasron Einei V'nofla Karad Yankov, Esav's eyes popped out and fell to the ground near Yankov's feet. Paschinu Yankov li Einei. And here we're just going to translate as far as what actually happened. To accept this at face value or not is not something we're going to delve into, but on the translation level it says, and Yankov, who was there lying in as a person needing to be buried, he opens his eyes, and he laughed, seeing now the death of Esav, v'hainu dichtiv. And it's with this in mind that we see the eyeballs of Esav falling to the ground and falling to Yankov's feet. And we emphasize that word here right now for feet. And Yankov opening his eyes and laughing. What does the pasuk say? And it's that which the pasuk says in Tehillim, Yismach Tzadik ki chaza nakam pa'omav yirchatz bedam harasha. The Tzadik is Yismach, is joyful when he sees the vengeance, when he sees divine justice carried out. Pa'omav means his legs, his feet. He will wash in the blood of the wicked. Esav was a non-righteous individual, to put it mildly, and seeing divine retribution. After all, Esav wanted to kill Yankov, and for many years that was the only thing that was on his mind. And here we see Esav getting his due punishment, and Yankov responding in kind. At that moment, there was a fulfillment of their mother's prophecy. Rivka was their mother. V'chtiv, she said, "Lomo eshkal gam shnechem yoim echad." She was very worried at the time that Esav threatened to murder Yankov. She reacted by saying, "Why should I have to lose both of you?" Eshkal is a parent losing a child. The term shchul is used. Eshkal. Why should I end up having both of you die on the same day? Well, in this case, it wasn't exactly that. Even though their death wasn't on the same day, Yankov died many days before. However, they were both buried on the same day. So at that point, that's the conclusion of that particular story. And the Gemara goes on, referring back to Yosef being the one who was in charge, who oversaw the burial of Yaakov. The Gemara asks, V'lo Yasik be Yosef, and if Yosef had not tended to it, cared for it, Echov lo havu me'aski be, what, his brothers wouldn't have been involved, wouldn't have overseen, taken care of their father's burial. V'aksiv, and we're going to have to come back to explain what the Gemara is really asking about. But in the meantime, to suggest that only Yosef was involved and not his brothers, that would be inaccurate. V'aksiv hayisu also bonav arza Canaan. And it says that Yaakov was carried off from Mitzrayim to Canaan by his sons. So everyone was involved. Let's take a look at the Rashi. A few lines up from here, in the middle of the narrow lines of Rashi, V'i lo yasik be Yosef echov mi lo havu maski be klomar. When you see the word klomar in Rashi, you realize that we're not merely translating, where the Gemara has words, but you have to add a level of understanding to those words. So what's bothering the Gemara is, Hey chinichu echov li Yosef lito loi es Hashem levado shekvuras avihem. How could the brothers allow, let's say, Yosef to get all the credit for their father's burial? Did they cast off their obligation and not care about him? And if Yosef didn't take charge, what, they wouldn't have overseen his burial? And so you see that they were involved in his transportation. Ubekvuraso ksiv achrei kavro es aviv tola kosuv bo shehu hoya ikar hadavar. The pasuk says achrei kavro es aviv, after he buried the father. So the pasuk seems to give credit to Yosef, and hence the question is, why is it that they allowed him, or maybe bestowed upon him, all of the credit? So the Gemara answers, Amru, Hanichulo, let it be Yosef's credit. Let him be the one who's acknowledged as the one burying Yankov. Kvodo b'mlochim yoshim b'bed yotos. The honor of our father is actually through kings. Yosef had the status of a king. He was a viceroy. And for our father to have been buried by the viceroy of Egypt is a greater honor to our father, more than his having been buried by commoners, us. So, in actuality, the whole family was involved with Yankov's burial. But in terms of who was given the credit for it, who was associated with it, in terms of who is, as we said, given credit for it, whose name is attached to it, that's Yosef. And that was their common consent, because that, in fact, gave more glory, greater honor to their father. Before continuing in the Gemara, we glance at the side for a new topic heading, the Nosei, Kvuras Yosef. Here the Gemara is going to focus on the burial of Yosef. The Mishnah made reference to the burial of Yosef being taken care of by Moshe Rabbeinu. Milanu Godol mi Yosef v'chulei Tona Rabbanan. Here we have a Tanaic source. Notice it's quite long. It takes you to the top of Omid Beis. As you scan ahead in this Tanaic source, you'll notice diamonds that appear. On the side under the Mivneh, the structural note, this represents Shnei Deos al Mokim Kvurasoi Shel Yosef b'Mitzrayim. Two opinions as to where Yosef's body had been buried in Mitzrayim. Bear in mind that Yosef arrived in Mitzrayim when he did, obviously at the beginning of the sojourn of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, and that entire time period was 210 years. So from the time of Yosef's death till the eventual exodus of Mitzrayim, many years had gone by, and upon the exodus from Mitzrayim, being that Yosef had requested as part of his, we'll say, last will, to be taken from Mitzrayim and buried in Eretz Canaan. He didn't want to have his remains stay there in Mitzrayim. At the point of Exodus, though, it became urgent for them to find where was he in fact buried. So now we continue with the Gemara. Tana Rabbana, Bo Urei, come and see, Kamo Chavivus Mitzvos al Moshe Rabbeinu. How much affinity Moshe Rabbeinu, Chavivus means beloved, endearment, affinity, love Moshe Rabbeinu had for mitzvahs. Shekol Yisrael Kula Nisasku B'Biza. At the time of time of their exodus, their imminent departure from Mitzrayim, the Jewish people were preoccupied with the spoils that they were going to take from Mitzrayim. V'hu nisasek b'mitzvahs. And Moshe Rabbeinu himself, he was preoccupied with the fulfillment of a mitzvah. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Mishlei Chacham Lev Yikach Mitzvahs, a man who's wise will try to acquire mitzvahs as opposed to pursuing wealth. Uminayin hoyo yodea Moshe Rabbeinu heichon Yosef kavur. And for how did Moshe Rabbeinu find where Yosef was buried? As we indicated, there was a significant gap in time between the death of Yosef and their exodus. Amru, so they said, Serach bas Osher nishtaira be'oisoi hador. The daughter of Osher, she was the link. This is a concept that is worth spending a lot of time pondering on, the concept of the generational link. And there was here Serach bas Osher, the daughter of Osher. She remained. She was literally left over. She remained from that generation. She was alive at the time of Yosef's death. She would know. And as we said, there's a great deal of depth to this idea of someone from the old generation and his or her significant role in serving as the transmission, as their role in the Masorah, the transmission of our faith, our religion, our Torah knowledge to the new generation. The Gemara continues and says, Holach Moshe etzlo, Moshe went to her. Omar lo, klum at yodas heichon Yosef kover. Do you know where Yosef is buried? Omra lo, she said, Oron shel matechas osu lo Mitzrayim v'kov'uhu b'nilus hanor. They made an iron coffin and placed him, Yosef, in the iron coffin and set it in the, we'll say, the Nile River. Nilus is the name of the great river of Mitzrayim, which we can associate with the Nile River. And why did they put him in the water? Kedei shizborchu meimov, through the great viceroy of Egypt that everyone recognized as a great man. We certainly recognize Yosef as a great pious individual. He would be the source of blessing. The Nile River would seasonally overflow its banks, thereby being the source of water for all kinds of irrigation canals, serving as the source of irrigation for all of their produce. It was a nation where a land region where rain was uncommon, and their source of water was the river. And having Yosef's body buried in the river was, in their eyes, a source of blessing. Holach Moshe v'Omar al Sfas Nilus. Moshe went and stood by the banks of the river. Omar lo, and Moshe proclaimed, Yosef, Yosef, Higia ho'es shenishba kodesh baruch hu shani goyel eschem. Calling out to Yosef, he says, the time has come that the Almighty swore that He would redeem the people. V'higia hashvua shishbato es Yisrael. And now is the time for the Jewish people to fulfill the vow that you imposed upon them, to see to it that you would be carried from Mitzrayim to Eretz Canaan for burial. If you reveal yourself, if you show yourself now, then good, we'll be able to carry out our end of the bargain. Im lav, and if you don't, if you remain there in the river's bed, then we are menukin, we're cleansed, we're free of the vow, of the oath that you imposed upon the Jewish people. Miyad tzof aronon shel Yosef. Immediately, this metal coffin floated surface. This word. V'al tetamehech ba'azot tzof. And don't be amazed. Tam is to be amazed. Don't be amazed. How can metal, how can iron float? Well, there's scriptural precedent for that. I don't want to say it's chronological precedent, but from our vantage point, namely as when the Gemara was written, so this was after the time of the story featured here involving the prophet Elisha, found in the book of Kings, Malachim Beis, Perek Vav, Psukim Hey and Vav. It says Sharei Ksiv. There was a story involving the prophet Elisha, in which you see iron floating. And here the Gemara shares the Psukim, as we mentioned, Psukim Hey and Vav, there in Perek Vav of Malachim Beis. There was an individual who was involved with a beam. He was cutting a beam, apparently with an axe, and the barzel, the barzel is the axe head, fell into the water. And the fellow who just lost his axe head, Aho Adoni, he exclaims, I'm in trouble now. Hushal means it's borrowed. What am I going to do? There's the axe head, flew off into the water. What am I going to do? Vayomer Ish Elokim, the man of God, meaning Elisha the prophet. Ona Nofal, where did it fall? Vayar Ehu Es Hamokom, and the man showed the prophet where it had fallen into the water. Vayiktsav Eitz, and he cut a piece of wood in a particular, we'll say, form. Vayashlech Shama, and he threw the wood into the water. Vayotzef Barzel, and it caused the axe head to float up. It could very well be that then the wood that he threw into the water would serve as the new axe handle, inserting itself miraculously into this axe head, and it floated toward the surface. And this is a miracle that was performed through the prophet Elisha. The prophet Elisha happened to have been a student of another well-known prophet, Elijah the prophet. And from this story you can derive through Kal V'chomer logic an explanation for what happened with Moshe Rabbeinu and Yosef's iron coffin. Uma Elisha Talmido Shel Eliyahu. Mind you, Elisha, who was a student of Eliyahu Talmido Shel Moshe, and Eliyahu was in turn a student-type descendant from Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu was also the leading prophet of all time, and he had taught other prophets, and eventually Eliyahu learned from them, and Eliyahu had a student, Elisha, and Eliyahu, as we say, is like a descendant of students from Moshe. Sof Barzel Miponov, the iron floated for the sake of Elisha. Moshe Rabbeinu alachas kama v'kama, for the sake of Moshe Rabbeinu, all the more so, iron would float. Up till now, we had approach number one, And that was what we highlighted with our diamond as to where Yosef was buried. Now approach number 2. Reb Nosson Omer be Kavarnit Shel Malachim Hoya Kavur. There's a note on the side, Pirush Beveis Hakvoros Shel Malachim. Yosef was buried in an Egyptian royal cemetery. V'hoyu sham aronos. We're reading the note on the side. V'hoyu sham aronos harbei. There were many coffins in this. That's a royal crypt. V'lo hoya Moshe yoidea ezu. Moshe Rabbeinu, by looking at them, couldn't identify which one was Yosef's coffin. So Reb Nosson tells us that was the burial site in Egypt. We continue in the Gemara at the beginning of the next line. Holach Moshe v'omad al kabarnit shel malachim. So Moshe went and stood by this royal burial site. Omar, and he said, Yosef igia eis. And here you see the same text as we saw before. No need to translate it again. Yosef igia eis shenishba kodesh baruch hu shani goyol eschem v'igia shvua shishbata es Yisrael. But at that time, Nizdazea Aroino Shel Yosef, the coffin in which Yosef his remains were located, shook. Nizdazea, it shook. Not loy Moshe veviu etzlo. Moshe understood that was quite miraculous, and hence that was an answer to his request, and he took that coffin. And all the years that the Jewish people were traveling in the desert, there were these 2 boxes, echad shel meis ve'echad shel shechina, mehalchin zeh im zeh. There was the Oron, the coffin containing the remains of Yosef, and there was the Oron containing the 10 commandments, the tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu received, we refer to as the 10 Commandments. And they were also in an Oron, and they were traveling side by side in the desert. And passers-by would say, what's the nature of these 2 boxes? Amru, they said, one is that of a deceased individual, Yosef, and the other is a box that is of a divine nature. Is this the way? Is this the normal way that a coffin containing a deceased individual is being transported side by side with divinity, the luchos habris? Amru. Well, they said, we continue at the top of Omid Beis, Kiem ze kol ma shekosu bazeh. He, that's in this box, Yosef, fulfilled everything that is contained, that's written in the other box. In other words, we have the example of a Tzaddik Hador, Yosef HaTzaddik, being the example par excellence of one who fulfilled the teachings of the Torah. So it's quite fitting that they should be transported one next to the other. This idea of Kiyem Zeh Kol Ma Shekosu Bazeh is an expression you find elsewhere. If I'm not mistaken, just saying off the top of my head, if you look in the end of the first parak of Bava Kama, you see a similar discussion or description involving Chizkiyahu HaMelech and the question of a Sefer Torah being brought to his coffin. The Gemara continues with a very similar sounding question as we saw earlier. And if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't take charge of Yosef's burial, the rest of the Jewish people wouldn't have done so. The pasuk indicates that they were involved. It says, "Ve'atzmos Yosef asher helu b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim kavru b'Shechem," and the remains of Yosef that the Jewish people brought up from Egypt were buried in Shechem. The Rashi here presents this question in a very similar fashion as we saw earlier. if you look at Rashi 3 lines from the top, at the end of the line, V'lo asik bei Moshe Klomar. Again, the Klomar, the key word, indicating that added explanation is needed. How could it be that the Jewish people would seemingly let Moshe Rabbeinu have exclusive control and care over Yosef's remains? Were they not concerned with the oath that had been imposed upon the entirety of the Jewish people? And had Moshe Rabbeinu not taken charge, they wouldn't have been involved. And let's continue with the Rashi, Hoksiv. We see the pasuk that we read already. Alma li'achar sheniftar Moshe b'Arvus Moav. After Moshe died in Arvus Moav. Arvus Moav is on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. It's before they crossed into the land of Israel. Moshe Rabbeinu already, at that point, he died. Yosef's remains were brought further into the land of Israel. So we see that after Moshe died, Yisrael, the rest of the Jewish people, did involve themselves with Yosef's burial and brought him over the Jordan River. So now we turn back to the Gemara. The Gemara asks another question. Having asked already one question, meaning if Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't involved, the rest of the Jewish people wouldn't have been involved. Of course they would have been, and we see that they were. Vesu, and furthermore, the Gemara continues, Ilo, Iasku, Bei Yisrael, if the entirety of the Jews weren't involved, Bonov, Lo Havu Maski Bei, his own sons, the direct descendants of Yosef wouldn't have been involved. Oksiv, Vayu Livnei Yosef Lenachlo. Let's take a look at Rashi. Vesu, Ilo Havu Misaski Bei Yisrael, La'achar Shinifta Moshe. Bonov mi lo havu maski bei vehechenichu bonov es shar ha'om l'sasek bo. How can it be that Yosef's direct descendants let others take care of their predecessor? V'haksiv v'Shechem, it says regarding Shechem, vayu livnei Yosef l'nachlo. Shechem was a city that was part of the section of Israel given to Ephraim, the son of Yosef. Almo benachlosam kovruhu dechoviv hoya alehen. We see from here that the burial of Yosef took place in their area. In other words, Bnei Yosef and the descendants of Yosef, they themselves were involved with his burial. So what we're left with at this point is a question: why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu is given credit, and why is it that the Jewish people are given credit when, in the final analysis, the direct descendants of Yosef would have taken care of their grandfather? The Gemara answers, Omru. They reasoned as follows: Hanichulo kavoda b'mrubim yoser mi'utin. His Yosef's great honor is through the entirety of the Pimrubim. Literally means the many being involved, more so than just the few. V'su amru, and furthermore they said Hanichulo kvodim b'gedolim yosem miktanim, and this goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that his honor is enhanced by being taken care of by the great, by Moshe Rabbeinu, more so than the lesser, the ktanim. In the pasuk that we saw cited on the last of the narrow lines, fourth line from the top of the Gemara, it mentions that the remains of Yosef were taken by the Jewish people and buried in Shechem. Kavru b'Shechem. My shna b'Shechem. What's unique or significant about that location? Omer Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina Mishchem Gonvu l'Shechem Nachzir Avedoso. Yosef was originally stolen, meaning his brothers had taken him and sold him off. Say it's a form of kidnapping. That's gonvu. They kidnapped him and sold him. And where did that take place? In Shechem. It's only fitting that he should be returned to Shechem. Nachzir Avedosa means the lost one. Aveda is that which is lost. Shechem's lost item, lost individual, namely Yosef. It's only fitting that he should be returned there. Koshu kroi adodi. Gemara finds that there's an inconsistency, a seeming contradiction in Psukim. Ksiv, one pasuk says, "Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo." Moshe took Yosef's remains with him. Uksiv, "Ves atzmos Yosef asher helu bnei Yisrael." The remains of Yosef that were conveyed by the Jewish people. So who took Yosef's remains? Was it Moshe or Bnei Israel? As we go on in the Gemara, you see triangles that appear on the side under the nosei mivneh. Hityachasut lemi she'oise dover v'lo gomroi ubo acher v'gomro. The Gemara's approach, three different approaches to one who starts a mitzvah, starts something but doesn't finish it, and someone else comes and finishes it. While bearing in mind the two psukim that we had, Moshe taking Yosef's remains, and then reference made to Bnei Yisrael, anyone who starts something, like Moshe Rabbeinu, who started the burial process for Yosef, but he didn't finish it. We mentioned earlier that Moshe died and buried before entering the land of Israel proper. So he started the care of Yosef's burial, but he didn't finish it. And someone else comes and finishes it off. Credit is given to the one that finished it as if he did the whole thing. And that's the message, that's what these two psukim come to tell us. It's true that Moshe Rabbeinu started it, but Bnei Yisrael, they finished the job, so it is they that get the credit. That's what the pasuk says. Asher he'elu Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael brought him out of Mitzrayim. And in fact, Moshe Rabbeinu was one that brought him out of Mitzrayim, but they finished the job, so they're given credit. Rabbi Ozer Omer af moridin oisoi migdulaso. Rabbi Ozer builds on what we just said and says that someone who starts something and doesn't finish it is lowered from his original position. Dichtiv, and here this is a pasuk that is related to Yosef, but at a much earlier point in time, when the brothers were scheming what to do with Yosef. They were irate, they were jealous, they were enraged, or whatever other adverb you want to ascribe to their attitude toward Yosef at the time. They wanted basically to kill him. Yehuda intervened, and he said, "Of what gain will we have through his death?" So Yehuda made an effort to save him, but he didn't finish the job. And it says regarding Yehuda, it says, "Vayhi bo'esahi," at that time, and this was where Yehuda intervened, stopping the murder of Yosef, but he saw to it that he was sold to Mitzrayim. So he, as we said, he started the salvation of Yosef, but he didn't finish it. And it says, right after that incident, "Vayhi bo'esahi vayered Yehuda," and we've underlined the word vayered, means he descended. For our purposes, means he experienced a descent. He was recognized as a leadership figure, and then he experienced a descent, a downfall, if you will. All, of course, in context. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Omar, Av Koiver Ishto Uvonov. Someone who starts something and doesn't finish it off is actually quite dangerous. He might end up burying his wife and children, Dichtiv. And continuing with the story involving Yehuda, it says, "Vatomos Bashua Eishes Yehuda, Uksi Vayomos Er Va'onan." The Bashua, the wife of Yehuda, died, and Er Va'onan, the sons of Yehuda, died. And all this was after that incident where Yehuda tried, or he made the first step in saving Yosef, but didn't finish the job. And this is what followed: the death of his wife and the death of his children. Yehuda's wife and Yehuda's children. As we go on in the Gemara, a double underline marking appears. These are Memros HaRav Yehonasan Berger b'inyan Yosef u'misaso. Comments made by Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav concerning Yosef and his death. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Ma Nikra Yosef Atzomos B'chayav. Why, while Yosef was still alive, do we find the term Atzomos, literally bones or remains, being used? Yosef himself said, "Valisem es atzmoisai mizen." You will bring my bones. Could have conceivably say, "Bring me." Why this use the word bones while he's still alive? Answer: Mipnei shalomicha b'chvoid aviv. He, Yosef, it was a truly righteous individual, and as we've said in previous shiur, when it comes to the scriptures and the way they deal with the righteous, the way our divine Tanakh deals with the righteous, is puts them under a magnifying glass and will highlight the smallest shortcoming that they may have had, and let's say enlarge it so that we can study and learn from it. So Yosef is charged with not showing maximum respect to his father, and he didn't protest. He didn't express any words of protest when it came to guarding the honor of his father. Well, what does that refer to? The Ko'amri lay, when the brothers of Yosef were making their case to Yosef, who they had not as yet revealed Yosef's identity, they said Avdecha Avinu. They referred to their father, who was also Yosef's father, as Yosef's servant. It's not, of course, not a respectful way to refer to one's father, or have one's father referred to thusly. V'lo omar luhu v'lo midi, and he didn't react at all. He remained silent, and we can assume that from the Gemara's objection, there was something that he could have said which would have somehow preserved the dignity of Yankov after hearing him referred to as, after hearing Yankov referred to as his, Yosef's servant, but he remained silent. And because of that, he is called Atzomos, Yosef, that is called Atzomos, even while he was still alive. The Yomer V'Yom Rav Vitema, another version of this is Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chanino, Mipnei Ma, Meis Yosef Kodim Li Echov. Yosef, who was, besides Binyamin, he was the youngest of all his brothers. Why is it that he was the first of the brothers to die? Mipnei Shehinig Atzmo Berabonos. It's because he ruled over them. There's much more to say on this point. If I recall correctly, the Maharsha elaborates a bit on this. We're translating the Gemara, and the issue that's dealt with by the commentaries is: does this statement apply directly to Yosef in the simplest sense of the word, or possibly not? But for our purposes, the fact that he was the king, was the viceroy, and his brothers fell under his rule, that's the reason that he died before all the rest of them. In other contexts, the concept of Hinig Atzmo Berabonos is presented as someone who rules in a heavy-handed fashion over his subjects. And it's on that point that I am hesitating that insofar as Yosef himself didn't rule in a heavy-handed, overbearing fashion over his brothers, but nevertheless he imposed his rulership over them. Of course, it was benevolent in his case, but even so, it's not looked on kindly through the eyes of Chazal, and hence he died before the rest at age 110. V'Yosef hurad Mitzrayma, Amar Rav Ozer al tikri hurad elo horid. The pasuk itself translates as Yosef was brought down, more of in a passive sense, and since the Torah doesn't have vowels in the Torah text, you have license to read it not as hurad, rather horid. And what would that mean? The pasuk would then be Yosef horid Mitzrayim, which would mean that the word horid being an active verb form, he brought them down. Shahorid itstagnine paro migedulasan. Yosef, with his powers, his powers of dream interpretation, his other powers, superseded those of the itstagnine paro, literally the stargazers, the royal counselors that Paro had. So you're seeing that what the itstagnine Paro tried to communicate to Paro did not accept, and that which Yosef did say was accepted. So you see that he brought them down. And Rashi says, when Yosef, interpreted the dreams of Paro accurately, and they didn't know how to explain it. We continue with the psukim dealing with Yosef. Vayiknehu Potifar Saris Paro. When Yosef was brought down to Mitzrayim after being sold initially by the brothers, Yosef ended up in Mitzrayim. It says in this pasuk he was purchased by Vayiknehu Potifar, who was a minister serving Paro. Omar Rav, and Rav explains that you see in this pasuk shekanoi li'atzmo. Potifar bought Yosef. Yosef, by the way, was an extraordinarily good-looking, at that point in time, young man, and Potifar bought him for himself, for we call mishkav zochar, homosexual relations. And at that point, there was we call heavenly intervention to protect Yosef from being defiled by this individual. Bo Gavriel Upirau. Gavriel, the angel, the well-known archangel, came and sterilized, castrated Potifar. That's Upirau. Loshen Piro is Sirus. Meikoraksiv, originally you see him, Potifar, referred to as Potifar. Ulbesof, later you see him referred to as Potifera. The word pera, as we just saw earlier on this line, the word piro, it means being castrated. Milanu Godol mi Moshe v'chulei. The Gemara moves on now to the next section of the Mishnah that had featured Moshe Rabbeinu having been the one to take charge of the burial of Yosef. So in that merit, when Moshe Rabbeinu died, the Mishnah tells us that Kodesh Baruch the Almighty himself took care of Moshe Rabbeinu's burial. The Gemara, before it gets involved with the actual burial of Moshe, quotes a pasuk, Vayomer Hashem Elai Rav Loch. Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the Jewish people about his own attempts to pray and merit entering the land of Israel, and the Almighty told me, says Moshe, Rav Loch, basically enough. Enough meaning do not pray anymore. Omar Rabbi Levi, Berav Biser, Berav Bisruhu. Moshe Rabbeinu used the word Rav in his argument, his rebuffing of Korach, who was the leader of a rebellion earlier. And the Gemara tells us, Berav Biser, he used the word Rav in announcing to Korach, Rav Lochem, enough. He says to Korach and his party of rebels, dissenters, that you already have enough glory, you have enough honor. And as we've been discussing in the Mishnah, measure for measure, Berav Bisru, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was silenced by the Almighty, he was told, Rav Loch, enough. There seems to be a certain, fine criticism here of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's something that really deserves further research, looking into it how Moshe Rabbeinu, how else, the question would be, how else should he have referred to Korach in forestalling their rebellion. Nevertheless, that's what the Gemara tells us at this point, at least, that he used the expression Rav Lochem, and when it came to the Almighty rebuffing or silencing Moshe Rabbeinu's attempts, the same expression was used. Dover Acher, another explanation, Rav Loch, Moshe Rabbeinu at this point was being informed by the Almighty that your entreaties to enter the land of Israel will not be fulfilled. And he said, Rav Loch, Rav Yesh Lecha, you have a master, Umanu Yoshua. Yoshua is going to succeed you, and he will bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel, not you. Dovar Acher, Rav Loch. Another explanation, the Almighty was telling Moshe Rabbeinu to stop the prayers, stop the entreaties, Shelo Yomru, that it shouldn't be said, HaRav Kama Kosha, the Talmud Kama Sarvon. The impression that the public could have received by seeing Moshe Rabbeinu in his entreaties and the Almighty not fulfilling his request, people would say how difficult, how tough the master is, and how persistent is the student. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed many prayers to merit entering the land of Israel, and yet the Almighty did not fulfill his request. And that would have created a negative image for the Almighty, and hence he said, Rav Loch, enough. V'chol kach lama. Why is it that Hashem didn't answer Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillas? The Gemara answers in a very, very abbreviated fashion. The Gemara says, Tana debei Rishmael lefum gam lo shichna. According to first we'll give you the literal translation. Lefum means according to the gamla is the camel. Shichna is the burden that you can place upon it. The larger the camel, the greater the burden that can be placed upon it. The greater the righteousness of a tzaddik, the more the Almighty will be scrutinizing him and holding him accountable for any wrongdoing. So that Moshe Rabbeinu, even though his level of piety was unsurpassed, nevertheless, the little shortcoming that he had was magnified many-fold, and because of his high level of piety, he was treated the way he was and not have his prayer answered. We continue in the Gemara with a topic heading entitled simply Kvuras Moshe, the burial of Moshe. Vayomer Alehem Ben Meo V'Yesrim Shona Anochi Hayom. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, I am 120 years old today. Shein Talmud Lomar Hayom. There's no. What is the purpose of saying today? Do you think that there's a source here for celebrating birthdays per se? The Gemara does not feel that way. The Gemara therefore is asking, what's the significance of specifying that today I'm 120? So the Gemara explains, Hayom milu yomai ushnosai. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that today, in fact, is my birthday, to the day, and this is the day that he is going to die as well. L'lamdecha, this teaches us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashlim shnoisem shel tzadikim miyom liyom u'mechodesh l'chodesh. The Almighty, when it comes to the righteous, their lives are filled from month to month and from day to day. Dichtiv, the pasuk says, "Es mispar yomecha amalei." Your numbered days I will fill. And the point again being that this, in fact, was a reflection of Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness in so far as that he died on the very day, 120 years earlier, on the very date, I should say, that he was born. The pasuk says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Lo uchal oid, lo tseis v'lavo. First we translate it literally. It says, I can no longer go out and come in. Sounds like he's quite aged, and is say bedridden or wheelchair bound, I can't move anymore. My lot says velova. What do those words really mean? Ilema lot says velovo mamish. If at this point in time, at his reaching age 120, he was physically incapable of movement, that's not true. V'aksiv u'Moshe ben 120 shana b'Moshe lo nos lecho. Moshe Rabbeinu was 120 years of age upon his death, and his lo nos lecho, lecho means his freshness, his youthfulness, had not, nos means departed, had not departed. Uksiv vayal Moshe me'arvos moav el har nevo, and at referring to that very time, it says Moshe Rabbeinu went from Arvos Moav to the Mount of Nevo. V'tanya shteimasrei malos hoyu sham, and we're taught that there were 12 stairs or 12 levels of ascent that were there. Uposen Moshe b'psiachas, and on that day, on the day of his death, he bounded them in one bound. So we're describing an individual of tremendous physical capability. What then does the pasuk mean when he says that I can no longer lotseis v'lavo? Amar Shmuel HaRav Yehonasan lotseis v'lavo b'divrei Torah. I'm no longer mentally equipped to analyze, to study the words of Torah. Malamed shenistatmu mimenu sharei chochma. That at that day, the day of his death, the gates of wisdom were closed, were sealed up from him. Vayelech Moshe v'Yoshua v'yisyatzvu ba'amoid. Moshe and Yehoshua stood there at the Moed, the Mishkan. Tana oisa Shabbos shel diu zugi hoisa. That Shabbos was a Shabbos of diu is two, zugi the pair, the two pair. Nitlo rishus mizeh v'nitno lezeh. That represented the transition of power from Moshe to Yehoshua. As we go on in the Gemara, you'll notice we have a long point. We also have a structural note on the side that will feature the diamonds that appear. Heichon Moshe, Mace, and Kavur. More will be asking, where did Moshe actually die, and where was he buried? And again, we want you to note that this is one long point. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, ilmoli mikro kosuv ef shalomo. If not for the fact that the scripture, that the psukim are written out saying what they say, we're going to encounter something that we otherwise would not have been able to say. Heichon Moshe Meis, where did he die? Bechelko Sheruvain, in the portion that would be assigned to the tribe of Reuven. Once again, we're right now on the eastern side of the Jordan River. On that side, there was land masses that were assigned to 2.5 tribes. One of those two was Reuven. The other tribe was Gad. Then there was also half of the tribe of Menashe. So where was Moshe's death? Bechelko Shruvein Dechti Vayal Moshe me'arvos moav el har nevoi. Unevo bechelko shel Reuven kaima. Nevo was in the section of land assigned to Reuven. Dechti v'vnei Reuven beno v'chulei ves Nevo. So you see Nevo in the context of Reuven. Vehechon Moshe kavur, and where was Moshe buried? Bechelko shel Gad. Dechtiv. The pasuk says, "Vayar reishis lo v'chulei." Now we have a starred note on the side, referring to the psukim Chof as well as Chof Aleph from Dvorim Perek Lamed Gimel, and on the side it says, let's read the psukim that we've written in. It says, "Ulegud Omar Baruch Marchiv God." And in Pasuk Chof Aleph it says, "Vayar reishis lo ki sham chelkas mechoykek safun vayesei." So you see in these psukim that God is referred to, and the burial of Moshe is referred to in this pasuk Chaf Aleph, Sham Chelkas Mechokek Safun. Safun is hidden or buried. And the Mechokek is the lawgiver. Reference to there was the place that Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. So what have we said up till this point? Moshe Rabbeinu's death, that was in the section assigned to Ruvain. Moshe's burial in the section assigned to Gad. Two separate land masses or land assignments. We continue in the Gemara. The distance from the section referred to before in Ruvain until the section referred to here in Gad, how far was that? Arba milin. It was 4 mil. Roughly 4 kilometers. Oisan arba milin miholicho. Who transported Moshe Rabbeinu from where he died to where he was buried? Melamed. This teaches us, and this is what we said before, that if we didn't have the psukim, we wouldn't be able to say this on our own. This teaches us that Moshe Rabbeinu's body was borne by the wings of the divine presence, and service angels were saying Tzidkas Hashem Osa Umishpotov Im Yisrael. The righteous ways of Hashem he did, and his judgments were with Israel. Who now, says the Almighty, will stand between me and the wicked to intervene, to pray on their behalf? Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu was known for his abilities in praying and for chastising them on my behalf. Ushmuel Amar, here we're giving another version as to what the Malachei Ashoris were saying. It says, they said, Mi ke'achacham u'mi yodea peishur davar. Who has the wisdom and who knows how to strike compromises between me, the Almighty, and my children, the people of Israel? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, the following was said, Ha'chochma me'ayin timotzei. Wisdom, me'ayin, my understanding of this quote is that wisdom is found from ayin. From ayin means from that which is nothing, meaning someone who makes himself like nothing, someone who is extremely modest. There you will see wisdom. Rav Nachman Amar, Vayomos Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. And it's there that Moshe died, the servant of God. This is a name here. Samalian Omar Vayomos Sham Moshe Safar Rabbo di Yisrael. Safar Rabbo, the great scholar. Safar is a scholar, sometimes referred to as a scribe. Here in this context, it would be the great scholar of Israel. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Hagodol Omer, Shnei Moser Mil al Shnei Moser Mil Keneged Machne Israel, covering an area of 12 by 12 mil. That's the size of the Jewish encampment in the desert. Baskol Mashmiya V'Omer, a heavenly voice came forth and announced, Vayomos Moshe Safra Rabbo Yisrael. This is what Samalian had just quoted as far as what the Shechina was saying. Here you have the heavenly voice was announcing that Moshe Rabbeinu has died. By V'yesh Omrim Lo Meis Moshe. There's another approach to this. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu did not die. Ksiv hacha vayomos sham. Uksiv hasam, and elsewhere it says Vayish sham im Hashem. Ma lahalon oimedu mishamesh. Just like the pasuk that says Vayish sham im Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu was standing and serving the Almighty. Afkan, even here where it says Vayomos sham oimedu mishamesh, he was alive, meaning, again, we're presenting these are very esoteric type Gemaras, but on a translation level, the Gemara is telling us that he did not die. Of course, one will still have to interpret the word Vayomos, but that's beyond the purview of our current Gemara markings, Daf Yomi shiur. Vayikbar Oso Bagai Beretz Moyav Mul Beis Pa'or. Omar Rav Brachya, Simin B'Soich Simin, a sign within a sign, a double sign. Rashi says many signs were given by the psukim where Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. Va'afilu hachi, and even so, the pasuk says, so no one knew where he was buried. Looking at Rashi at the bottom, Siman B'Soch Siman Klomer Simonim Harbe. There are many signs, many points of let's say this location points mentioned in the pasuk. Beretz Moyav, Bagai, Mubeis Pa'or, and even though all of those signs were mentioned, it wasn't known where he was buried. We continue at the top of Daf Yudalid, Gistera Shel Beis Pa'or. Malchus HaRosha is oftentimes a reference to the Roman Empire, the wicked kingdom, the Romans, sent to the Gistera, the ruler of that area, the area called Beis Pa'or, the location where the pasuk tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. And this Gistera, this official, was ordered, Hareinu Heichon Moshe Kavur. We want you to show us, the Roman government wanted to know, where is Moshe Rabbeinu buried? Amdu Lamala, they stood above. We'll say the scenario would appear to be we have a mountain slope, so they stood on the top. Nidme lahem lamata. It appeared that his grave was lower down. Lamata, they stood below. Nidme lahem lamala. It appeared that it was higher up. Nechliku l'shtei kitos. Well, they then divided into two groups. Oisan shamdim lamala, nidmehem lamata. Those to whom it appeared, those who were standing on the high ground, it appeared that the grave was low. Lamata, those standing low down below, nidmelahem lamala, it appeared that he was above. L'kayim mashenemar, then this scenario describes, there was a fulfillment of that which it says, v'lo yoda ish es kuraso, and no one knew where he was buried. You'll notice that we have a series marking. We're going to only start this series right now. These are explained on the side under the Mivneh heading, Meimro Shel Reb Chama Bar Chanina. These are statements made by Reb Chama Bar Chanina. The first one is what we're starting with now. Reb Chama Bar Chanina Amar, Af Moshe Rabbeinu Einu Yodeh Heichen Kavur. Even Moshe Rabbeinu himself didn't know where he would be buried. Ksiv Hacha, it says, V'lo yoda ish es kuraso. Ksiv Hasam v'zois habrocha sheberach Moshe ish. Well, you see the term ish in both psukim. In the second cited pasuk v'zois habrocha, it's clearly a reference to Moshe Rabbeinu, and hence in the first quotation, V'lo yoda ish, ish is Moshe Rabbeinu. He didn't know where he was going to be buried. The Omar of Chama Bar Chanina, mipnei ma nikbar Moshe etzel Beis Pa'or. Why was Moshe Rabbeinu buried right next to this idolatrous location? Beis Pa'or was the name of an idol, and the question is, why was Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of our people, buried in such a place of indignation as this idolatrous location? The Gemara answers, Kidei lechaper al ma'aseh Pa'or. His presence there served as an atonement for the sins that took place there with that particular idol, as is revealed in the Chumash. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.